Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our interview of Carol Zangari on Discover AAC. This is really exciting for me because Carol was one of the first people that I got to meet when I got into the AAC. This is a huge inspiration for me. As many of you probably know, Carol runs the Practical AAC blog, which is probably one of the best regarded, most influential blogs in AAC. Carol is also a phenomenal clinician, and she's got a huge amount of experience in the AAC space. She's a professor of AAC at Nova in Florida, and they've probably got the biggest AAC training program in all of America and possibly all over the world. So Carol is one of the most incredible, influential people on the planet in AAC, at least in my book. And we're incredibly excited to be having her on Discover AAC. Just to introduce Discover AAC, myself and Lucas, I'm Ajit. I'm the founder of Ajit, and along with Lucas, I run Discover AAC. Lucas, who is also on this call, is the founder of Language Craft, which is a company that does therapy and also curriculum and AAC stuff in Portland, Oregon. So there's three of us from three different parts of the world. We're all here to talk about AAC. So, Carol, if you're ready, we have a question to keep things off quick. And I think we're all really curious to know about practical AAC, which is incredibly influential in the space. What gave you the inspiration to start practical AAC? What's the gap that you were looking to fill when you got started with practical AAC back in 2012, I think?
Well, thank you for those kind words, Ajit. I actually started Practical AAC with my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Robin Parker, right at the end of about 2011. And Dr. Parker passed away in 2014, but we had 20 years of friendship and collaboration, and we shared a passion for severe communication impairment and AAC. So we did a lot of work together because we were both faculty members in the speech-language pathology department, worked on a variety of different projects, and we had this tradition of kind of de-stressing with these little retreats. And for us, you know, it wasn't anything big or fancy. It was really us just taking a long walk in the Florida sunshine, and we'd spend maybe the first half of the day venting and getting a lot of things off of our chest. And then you know, the rest of the day planning some new projects. And there might have been a bottle of wine or two in there somewhere along the way as well. So at that time, you know, we had both been professors for a very long time. She had been a doctoral student of mine and then became a professor. And we had both been feeling, I would say, more than a little bit discouraged about the fact that the quality of the AAC services were still so spotty after all these years, you know. And of course, there were some fantastic SLPs and some amazing teachers, right? But not enough to go around, right? The good ones were too busy. And quite honestly, the not so good ones were doing some damage. And it seemed to us that too many folks that had significant communication challenges were not getting what they needed. And that was stressing us out to no end. And just when we would get to a point where we had sort of calmed down, something good had happened, we would get yet another call from a panicked family with a 14-year-old nonverbal kid who had never had any decent AAC, and we're like, really, people, in all these years, nobody could have gotten it together so that this kid had some communication. And in this time, of course, we had been doing all the things that academics traditionally do, teaching classes in AAC and in autism and presenting at conferences and publishing a couple of papers and books. And it just wasn't getting us very far in terms of getting better services to the majority of people out there with AAC needs. And so we decided, you know, what's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result? We figured, come on, we're smart ladies. Let's at least try something different. There's no guarantee that it's going to work any better than what we've been doing in the past decades. but at least, we'll give it a shot. And so we delved into learning about social media, which is kind of like a big shock to me, and it was to Robin as well, because we're both very much introverts. And so to put yourself out there in social media was a terrifying and an unnatural thing for both of us. We both are people that would much rather be behind the scenes than at the forefront. But, we delved into learning about social media, and blogging became a big part of that. So we started it, with some of the free sites, and then in early 2012 transitioned to WordPress. And now Practical AAC has been around for a while, and I'm very determined to keep up Dr. Parker's legacy. It seems to be making an impact that we weren't making with more traditional academic venues. And at this point, Practical AAC, we've got about 1,200 posts behind us, and it's been a lot of fun. But that's a little bit about the history, Ajit.
That's great. I think that we're very much in agreement about the relative, poverty of resources in our field. So practically, it's one of the fantastic resources in the world.
Well, thank you.
Kind of leads into the next question too about the comment you made about AAC being sort of a team game, which I know is one of our big priorities too. Is sort of wraparound support for families. Everyone else involved in the child's life. I guess my question is, how do you present that to the parents? How do you put the idea of the sort of at-home support needed?
Well, I think the fact is that AAC has to be a team game, and for me, that's a natural fit because my background before I became an SLP was as a direct service provider. And I think when your first jobs in the field of disability are ones that bring you very close to individuals with these kinds of needs, because I was a nurse's aide and a teacher's aide, and I worked at disability camps, and I worked at big residential institutions and in group homes in the community. And, when you come from that kind of background, it becomes apparent really quickly that anytime you set up a situation where there's one person who can support the needs of an individual, it's going to fail pretty quickly, right? If it's all dependent on one person, as great as that person is going to be, something is likely to happen so that things fall apart and that individual ends up without the supports that they need. And so really these days, the families that tend to cross my path, right, at this stage in my career, are ones that already know that they want to proceed down an AAC journey, or they've stopped and started a number of different times. So it's not so much that I'm pitching AAC to families who aren't sure if they want to go there or not. It's just a function, I think, of where I am in my career. They've come across my path because somebody's recommended that to them already. So I'm not usually now the first person to introduce them to it, which, I love both kinds of conversations, but they are really different, Lucas. So I'm not pitching the need for AAC to them. They're already there, but rather helping to help them get a sense of what the journey might look like for their son or daughter. And what I found is that working with families requires a very different approach, an approach really different than the ones that I use with graduate student clinicians, right? So I've been working with student SLPs who are learning to implement AAC strategies and tools since the late 1980s, both clinically and in graduate courses. And kind of the structure, the didactic approach that they need is pretty ingrained in me, right? Because I teach 6 AAC classes a year. I do clinical supervision in AAC 42 weeks out of the year. So my mind tends to be focused on the things that work well for beginning clinicians, right? That structure, building depth as well as breadth in content. And that's where my head goes automatically. But families require a really different approach. And I've really had to learn from those experiences, and fortunate to have worked with some amazing families. Because overall, the grad students seem to do best when we teach from like a general big picture approach, right, to AAC learning. And gradually, as we build their knowledge base, help them learn to apply those general overarching principles to specific situations so that they can then be prepared to serve a wide range of clients who have, severe communication impairment. So families don't need or want that broad approach, right? They are intensely focused on their situation. And that's as it should be, right? That's their job, right? So our approach has to be almost the opposite, right? And it took me a long time to get the hang of this, right? So we partner with them to address the issues that are specific to their son or daughter or their husband or wife or their parent, right? If it's an aging parent with dementia or aphasia or Parkinson's. And over time, we help them as they're building their skills and as they're building their knowledge base for their loved one. We also help them see how the specifics of what we're doing therapeutically are built on some general guidelines and some general principles. And if we can help them kind of see those patterns, that allows them to then be better prepared to cope with change, right? Because the child is going to grow and develop, right? Or move to a different service provider, right? I'm just a blip in their life, right? But they're in it for the long haul. They're going to go to a new school. And so the specifics are all they want to focus on in the beginning, and that's fine, and that's great, and that's where we put our energies. But eventually, I think it's also important to help them see the key ingredients. What's the operating ingredient? What's the active ingredient in this little package here? Whether it's the strategies or the tools, help them discover those patterns and the principles in what they've been doing, so that they can recognize and use those as things, as a force for change as things, move forward. I would say, Lucas, beyond that, I've learned so much from families. I don't even know where to start. But one of the big things has been really starting with what their priorities are, right? So I'm used to, as a professor or as a clinical educator, I know what my priorities are, right? I know 1, 2, 3, I've got to get this student clinician knowing and understanding and being able to do these things. And I still kind of have that in the back of my mind with families. But my first job, I find, before I earn the privilege of being able to share my wish list, is to discover what's important to them. And usually they can't tell me, not in a straightforward way. It's more of an ongoing dialogue that is built around an emerging relationship that we're building. But I found that if I can somehow keep scratching to discover what some things are that are important to them, I can go a long way in helping craft an intervention plan for them that is likely to be more successful. And a big piece of that is connecting them with other families who might be a little bit further along the journey than they are. Maybe their child is a little younger, or maybe it's a little bit older, or maybe they've been doing this longer. And also, I think really being willing to partner with them and be vulnerable as a service provider, be willing to learn from them, not just be someone who feels like, oh, it's a good thing that this person came to me, the expert, but just really be on a side-by-side journey where we can learn from one another. Just some thoughts.
So that's phenomenal.
It's so great. Yeah. What I love your use of the word discovery too. I mean, I think that's fantastic. That's one thing I often think about is making sure I bring the evidence, right, and bringing the the strategies and everything else to the family, but not bringing my own agenda, right? It's about their needs and their wants and their goals. Sorry, I interrupted you, Ajit.
I was just completely agreeing with Carol's perspective that we can learn so much from parents. I remember in my own journey, getting around out, a lot of insight maybe comes from parents. We can learn about all these things in theory. In practice, there is just so much variation from family to family, from culture to culture, that it blows your mind sometimes just to see how parents think about things. And I think that's what my next question to you is going to be, at. Do you have a favorite anecdote or favorite examples of creative ways in which AAC has been used, generalized outside speech therapy in homes by families or in classrooms by creative teachers?
That's such a great question, Ajit. I guess my favorite examples are those parents and teachers who've made AAC ubiquitous, right, in their lives and in their classrooms. And I think back 15 or 20 years ago. I know I'm dating myself here, but when I first saw some of the communication boards that Pam Harris made for her son Josh. She made them on kickboards, for when he was on the pool. Right in Florida, we spend a lot of time in the water, but this is when I was at Purdue in Indiana, and she was, in Illinois. Making communication boards and putting them on a kickboard, 20 years ago it must have been. And she made them on pillowcases for when he was in bed. And how generous she was in sharing those ideas and letting us share those images to inspire our graduate students and others. So there have been a lot of neat little sort of crafty and creative things, but really the ones that have most inspired me have been the people who have just made it present, right, throughout their waking hours.
Absolutely. I think I've seen examples of AAC on the fridge magnet, on a refrigerator. And I think I love the idea of just making it available everywhere. And not just high-tech age. I mean,
exactly.
That will work even when there's no battery, there's no electricity, and all that stuff. When you're out in the pool, I think that was a great example as well. Making AAC ubiquitous, I think that's a fantastic takeaway.
Well, let me ask a little bit about, I guess, modeling and prompting. So this is, I think we know that these are some of the most important things that we can do, right, as clinicians and also family members. But paradoxically, they do sort of easy to explain sometimes, but difficult to do in practice very well. I'm wondering if you have any tips. What would you say are the best ways to go about modeling?
Yeah, I love this because it's something we do. We think a lot about, and I had the privilege of training some teams up in the Panhandle of Florida earlier this week, and we spoke a lot about both of those things. So let's maybe talk about prompting first. As we all know, there is such diversity among the AAC, among the population of individuals who use AAC, right? And so many different AAC tools that they're learning. So it makes sense that that one strategy for prompting is not going to be appropriate for all of them, right? If we think of just one etiology, if we chip off, autism, for example, right? And we all know these learners are so different one from another. And then, a whole slew of other clinical populations. So a lot of heterogeneity there. And the apps and the AAC devices are so different too. So one early message, of course, that we've all heard is that the prompting needs to be really individualized. And I know when I say that to my graduate students, they kind of roll their eyes at me. It's not a very satisfying answer. It's like, yeah, well, what does that really mean? Like, that tells me nothing. So let me say one thing that applies to every kind of learner and every type of AAC in terms of how we should be using prompts. And that is with great respect, respectfully, and in ways that honor that person, right? Our goal is to empower them, not to get them to comply, right? So for a beginning learner or someone who is getting a brand new device or is being introduced to a new AAC app or a new page set or new vocabulary, we would probably use kind of a most to least prompt hierarchy, right? Because we want them to be maximally successful at first. And usually that means that they're going to need a lot of prompting and a lot of support so that they don't make a lot of mistakes, right? We want to give them practice doing it right? They're going to get enough practice without us doing it wrong. We want them to get practice, get that experience, get the feel of doing it right, right? And I always use the analogy as a little girl learning to ride a bike, because I think a lot of us can have that memory, right? It was such a freeing feeling, learning to, getting your first bike and learning to ride a bike. So I remember my dad taking me back in the alley behind our apartment, and I have a summer birthday, so I must have gotten a new bike for my birthday. And he put me on the bike, the shiny red bike, and my little feet on the pedals, and his one hand was behind my bum holding the seat, and his other hand was on the handlebars. And as he moved the bike forward, right, my feet, because they were on the pedals, my legs, made that reciprocal motion. And my brain says, oh, that's what pedaling feels like? That's what this is supposed to be, right? So it helped me form that connection of what other people were doing to make this bike riding thing happen. And now I didn't have all the pieces in place, right? So he'd let go for a few seconds, and I didn't have the balance, so I'd wobble, right? And he'd quickly grab onto it as I got my balance. Excuse me. And I didn't really know that I had to power myself. He was moving along and running with me. But little by little, right, I was able to put those pieces together because my body was given that experience of what it feels like when you're doing it well. So with the beginning communicator, my intent is to help them get it right? And that usually means a lot of physical guidance. But they may come to me as an interventionist with a body that doesn't tolerate a lot of touch all that well, right? It doesn't feel comfortable to them, right? Or they may come to me with an intervention history that caused them to be resistant to being assisted in that way, right? I get a lot of individuals on my caseload. I love working with adolescents and the slightly older guys, right? And a lot of times they've experienced so much failure, right, in their lives that, they're not so keen on us getting in their face and helping them through things because they're like, okay, here's one more thing I'm not doing quite right, and I just got to tolerate this lady like the scores of others who have come before her, doing things to me. So I really have to rethink my approach and adjust, because if I use a lot of physical, guidance with those kinds of folks, I'm probably going to make things worse, not better. I'm probably not going to achieve my goal. I've got to adjust and look for other ways to guide them, right? So as I do that, and they're they're acquiring some skills, but maybe, I don't know, later on, maybe they've got some emerging skills, but they're not using them on a consistent basis, right? So at that point, I got to rethink my prompting strategy entirely. And there's where I might flip it. So you know what to do. You've got the feel of it. And now I really want to focus on you getting independent or more independent, right? I still want you to be successful. So I don't want to yank all the supports that allowed you to be successful. But I sure don't want to create an experience where you're stuck with me all the time or somebody else all the time in order to be able to do this. So now I might switch my prompt hierarchy to that least to most prompt hierarchy. So those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about with prompting. But you also asked, Lucas, about modeling. And that can be a kind of confusing term, right? Because we use modeling for two distinct things, right? So you asked about it in the context of prompting, right? And it's true that modeling is one option for prompting to guide a learner toward a correct or a desirable response. But I think the more important use of modeling, right, in this conversation is not modeling for prompting. It's about using AAC to create an appropriate language learning environment, right? It's about us speaking AAC to them because AAC is the language that they're trying to learn, right? And so as we all know, especially Ajit, who has a beautiful little one at home, right? We speak to typically developing children for a year or so before we expect them to produce the words. And these are kids with no problems whatsoever, right? But for AAC learners, they never have that opportunity, right? When we introduce AAC, they have 0 months of opportunity of observing competent AAC models. And if the kids don't make significant progress with their AAC within, I don't know, the first year, we question their abilities. We doubt their learning abilities, right? We want to change directions. We want to change horses in the middle of that stream without acknowledging that we probably put them in a completely unfair situation, right? We're asking them to learn this language of AAC, this language of pictures, this language of technology that hardly anyone in their lives really speak. And look, the reality is, if you ask me to learn a foreign language, Ajit lives in a country where there are many, many, many languages and many, many, many more dialects. If he tried to teach me one of those, and I was not around people who spoke in that language, look, the reality is I wouldn't be able to do it, and I have no conditions that interfere with my language learning ability, but I just couldn't do it. And that's pretty much the situation that's confronting most AAC learners today. And I think we're getting better at this, but we've got a long way to go, right? And unfortunately, I think our educational systems and the medical systems that fund the services we provide do not give us any support for us as professionals or parents developing the skills that we need to be competent speakers of AAC. And that is a prerequisite, I believe, to be a competent interventionist or a competent instructor of AAC. So we're in a really tough place because Medicaid and Medicare and the school system doesn't have a lot of tolerance for me getting up to speed with a particular app, right, or a particular vocabulary set, or a particular SGD. And in the meantime, I need to be speaking in that 24/7. So I think we know that we need to get better at this. We're all still struggling with the same thing. I think the takeaway for all of us is we have to manage our expectations. Let's stop yanking things from kids. Let's stop changing horses in the middle of the stream. If we haven't evaluated the situation and come to the conclusion that they in fact have had a fair language learning platform upon which this AAC instruction can be built. If we look at that situation and say, look, they haven't had 6 months, a year of competent models of observing AAC being spoken before that AAC instruction is happening, I think we're really on shaky ground, assigning the responsibility for the lack of learning on the part of the student. I think we have to be very, very careful there.
Right. And the way to do that is to make a model to provide the student or the child as much opportunity to receptively observe AAC by modeling everything that you communicate with the child in the language that is. I guess that's the message in terms of how that fits into the thinking.
Yeah, I love your point about withdrawal of the device. You know, I've seen that happen so many times. And it's like putting a child in Spanish class with someone saying, "Well, he didn't ask for el baño, so let's switch to French." You know, there's a learning curve with all these things. So.
I think, in my experience, I've seen that it takes years sometimes for a child to develop fluency with AAC, and I think it's worth the wait. It's certainly something that eventually, when it does work, it's a magical moment. But I want to rewind, Carol. I want to rewind to the point where AAC is first introduced to a child. And we spoke briefly about how there are so many different apps and devices out there, and we have so much to choose from, and that's a good thing. But it sometimes seems that AAC assessment itself is part art and part science. And a lot of times people just, a therapist just chooses an app that they like. But I'm sure that there are insights that you have how to make assessment much more likely to result in long-term success. And I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, Ajit, this is such an interesting and a timely topic. And of course, there's a lot of things that are important here. I used to teach a whole course on AAC assessment. I think one really critical thing is to have a solid process, right? And make sure that that process gets well implemented. Now, depending on the kinds of folks that you tend to see, that process may look really different. I mean, it's certainly going to look different for, somebody with ALS, than it is going to be, a 2-year-old who, was recently diagnosed with autism and isn't yet speaking orally. I guess one of the things I want to, bring to the table is this is an area where I think we need some change. The model that we have been teaching to new professionals for the past couple of decades, the feature match model of AAC assessment, the reality is, I'm a practical person. That comes from being a nurse's aide and being a teacher's aide and being in a residential facility where I changed 120 adult diapers in a shift. You have to think of the practicalities and the realities of things. The reality is it's not being implemented in the vast majority of settings where people with severe communication needs get their services, right? It is happening in some. There are some amazing hospital programs, right, and clinical programs, and a couple of schools that are implementing that model, right? But as somebody who has been a long-time clinical educator and has trained literally hundreds of speech-language pathologists who are out in the field today, I can tell you that it is very unlikely that they are able to implement what we teach them to do in graduate school. And here's another situation where we have to review the definition of insanity, right? Should we keep teaching them the same thing, right? So for the most part, it's not being implemented. And I think it's important for us to reflect on this and try to understand why is that, right? And what are some of the next steps? I feel very strongly that we shouldn't continue to teach our new professionals to do AAC assessments in a certain way and then go see them, go off into practice settings where that approach is not sustainable. It's not feasible, right? So one thing that I'm really excited about is a short course on this very topic that I'm involved with that's coming up at the ASHA convention in Denver this November. So we've put a panel together made up of academics and scholars and practitioners in schools and private practice, all speaking on this. And our goal is to open up a dialogue in the field, right, about how we're really doing these assessments, right? But what improvements we can make to strengthen our assessment practices. And we have people from California and Texas and Michigan and Georgia. And we're going to be exploring some of these issues, hopefully sharing some ideas to strengthen the assessment practices for all of us, right? Because we don't want to just have this be a rant session, of course. But hopefully charting a path together, or at least opening that dialogue, looking forward to how we can create better assessment models in the future. Because what we don't want to do is throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? There's some things that we are firmly committed to that are part of this feature match approach to assessment. But I think it's not working for the field at large to continue doing business as usual. We have to figure out some ways to take the key ingredients, the things that we so dearly love and believe in about that model, but reconceptualize it for the practicalities of what's happening today in the workplaces where educators and speech language pathologists are likely to encounter these individuals. So I'm afraid that's probably not very satisfying, but that's kind of where I am in my thinking about it.
So I want to ask you a follow-up question, Carol, because I think it is clear that teacher matching is not the best way of doing assessment in a world where there are 10,000 apps out there. Do you have an example of something that does work better than teacher matching?
Well, I wouldn't say I have an example for a model, but I do have a lot of ideas because the model is, in some ways, is almost driven by the service delivery setting, right? So if somebody is going to a center-based program, right, for a comprehensive AAC assessment, that's, I believe, should be a different model, a different set of protocols, a different structure, because we probably have a different purpose or objective in mind for that kind of assessment than the type of assessment that most of my former students are doing. So most of my former students are in clinical settings or in schools, right? So part of that is about selecting the technology, but the bigger part is figuring out, doing the assessment that tells the clinician what should the goals be, how is this person likely to learn, right? How can we create an intervention path forward for this individual? So I think that we have to stop thinking the one-size-fits-all model for AAC assessment and have it be more purpose-driven, right? So what I always try to do in teaching AAC assessment is first try to clarify your purpose. Why the heck are you doing this? Are you doing it to select an AAC tool, a speech generating device, an app? And if so, what's the purpose there? What do you want that app to be able to do? For some kids, we look at them and our eyes sparkle because we can see, oh my gosh, in a quick period of time, I can get this kid to generative language. For other kids, quite frankly, not so much, right? We have to build in them the understanding that communication can change their lives, right? And that's a very different kind of app that can help me with that, or tool that can help me with that, than the one that can get them to generative language within the next 12 months, right? So clarifying the purpose, what is it that you want that app or device to be able to do, I think will help us better able to select tools and strategies for the assessment purpose. So I think crafting, changing our mentality as academics, as scholars, as practitioners, away from, okay, there's this one model that we all should be following, and if we're not following it, we want to hide it. It's a feeling of shame. I don't want anybody to know I do my assessments this way, right? Because that's all my school or my clinic will allow me to do in a practical sense, right? Nothing good comes from that emotion of being embarrassed of what you do. You can't grow from that, right? So we have to figure out a way to get past that. And I think part of it is us looking realistically at what will work, what is necessary for assessments that have this purpose, that are being done in this kind of service delivery setting. And I think the other thing that will do, Ajit, is, I don't know how to say this in a diplomatic way, so let me just say it the only way I know how. Often with AAC assessments, people who are involved in doing them are not necessarily working together well, right? So it may be that I'm serving this kid in the school and things aren't going as well as the family was hoping they would, and so they take them to a center-based program for an assessment, right? And there isn't necessarily this good collaboration between the AAC assessment in the school or in my clinic, because I'm in a university clinic, right, or the center-based program. And I think if we had a better set of options for AAC assessment models, we would be happier in saying, look, I'll do this, you do this, we'll come together, we'll put that stuff, together in a package, we'll figure out how that fits and bring that back to the family, right? And do some discovery and decision making together. We don't have a model that allows us to do that. And I think we all, practitioners, families, and kids alike, really suffer. And I do mean suffer because it causes all of us a lot of angst. Look, when we're not doing our job well as speech language pathologists, it really gets to us. We went into this profession because it's a calling, because it's a mission. And so when things aren't working, we're the kind of people that keeps us up at night, right? That is not something that feels good. And so I think a big piece of this is in a way not our fault, right? We have to go back and redraw the blueprints for some of this. Because I think we put practitioners into a no-win situation. And we need to figure that out. Those of us in academia, those of us who have, a little bit more freedom in how we do things, we've got to go back to the drawing board and take another look at these things and do it together.
So when you're starting this process, I'm sorry, I keep going down the assessment road here. I know that's such a big topic, like you said. What are some of the critical, I guess, baseline pieces of data or before your decision at the very beginning?
Sure, Lucas. So for me, a lot of it is about observation, right? And getting a good snapshot of how that individual is communicating now. So for example, in our clinic, when we do AAC evals, we try as much as possible to do them at least in 2 visits, right? Where one is in the community, where we get to go to their school, which is harder and harder, by the way, or at home, or wherever they live, work, and play. And that is such a powerful thing because it gives me the opportunity to see what typical communication, more or less, I mean, nobody's communicating in a typical way when a bunch of, when a professor and a bunch of grad students are there observing, but it's certainly more typical than what I would see when they come to the clinic. So I get to see how they're communicating in their environments. I get to see how their typical interaction partners are communicating with them. I get to see the lay of the land of the physical environment. What are the little things that are going on there that we can exploit and build on as we, craft a path forward for them? And what are some of the constraints, that they face? So I think a big part for me is observational assessment. And one thing, Lucas, that I'm really big on is observing with a purpose in mind. So a lot of times, people will say, okay, I'm going to go into the classroom. That's great. There's no place I'd rather be. But what's your goal? What are you looking for? Right? Don't tell me that I'm just going to go in and see how he's communicating. Because all that will do is give you very general awareness level, amorphous bits of information. And what we need is data. Right? So I need to take that as an opportunity to collect very specific kinds of data. So it depends on the level of communicator and how they're communicating now, right? But for a beginning communicator, and that's mostly what, these conversations are about, I'm looking for a couple of key things. I'm looking at what their communication modalities are, how they're communicating. So if I'm observing him for 20 minutes in circle time, how many interactions, how many utterances, so to speak, are with body movement or challenging behavior or vocalization or using a picture or using natural speech or a sign approximation? So I want to do a frequency count, right, of those things to capture. Here's how he's communicating now. Because that's very important for me in deciding what his AAC tools are. If he's not using anything symbolic, right, nothing to represent concepts, right, no word approximations, no sign approximations, no representational gestures or pictures, right, that's a different set of AAC tools, right, than a kid who is already doing some signing, even if they're kind of crappy, right? Trying to say some words, using some pictures, right? Those are very different situations, right? So I want to know how they're communicating. I also want to know what's driving their communication, right? What are the purposes or the communicative intents that I'm able to observe? And so the ones that people think most about are requesting. And I love Howard Shane's term, goods and services, So often when we start AAC, we're thinking about, let's give them ways to get stuff, to get things happening. And that has a wonderful place. It's an insanely powerful thing. But I think we've overemphasized it, right? As I go around classrooms or I observe therapy sessions and I see wonderful little snack activities where kids are able to tell how many goldfish they want and how much juice they want and all of those wonderful things. It's terrific, right? There's so much richness in communication for these individuals that goes beyond requesting. And I think we don't realize how motivating that is to them, right? So I'm thinking of one little guy that I worked with for a couple of years. And honest to goodness, he wasn't about the stuff, right? You could have ripped off a piece of a napkin and given it to him to play with. And if you handed up and made it silly and did some fun stuff back and forth with him, he would have liked that as much as the $50 light up, musical toy that I got from Amazon, right? He wasn't about getting that thing. He was about making me look ridiculous, and we forget sometimes, we focus on requesting, I think, because it's concrete for us, it's tangible for us, and it's powerful. I'm not saying we don't do that, but it's incredibly important for us to look for all the different purposes for communication. I'll never forget an experience I had with a young man with Angelman syndrome, right? And this was many years ago. And in those days, we really assumed that kids with Angelman syndrome had very significant intellectual disability and would be poor users of technology, right? And so we were doing a lot of things to build his skills around behavior regulation functions, requesting, getting attention. And we were coming back from Christmas holiday. I was running an AAC preschool, which we did for many years here. And he had, his mom had twin babies over the holiday, and they were bringing the babies in to show his class, to drop them off for the first day. And he went to every adult in that classroom, and he took them by the hand, and he took them over to each baby one by one, right? He just took us over, led us over to the baby, and put our hand on the baby. And he looked at us and smiled, and then he grabbed us and yanked us to the other parent, right, and put our hand on that baby. And he wasn't telling me he wanted anything. He was showing off, right? His sweet little baby brother and sister. And you know how you learn those things? You know things and then you learn them at a completely different level. That was such an aha moment for me that we frequently underestimate what they are trying to do and tell us. And there's so many more things they find reinforcing. So to me, being able to capture how they're communicating, why they're communicating, and then the other thing that I want to frequency count on is their communication frequency. So if I observed them for 10 minutes and they communicated one time in 10 minutes, that's a different path forward than the kid who communicated 10 times in 10 minutes. So those three pieces help me, Lucas, in crafting my direct assessment, pieces to the process a little bit more carefully. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
That was tremendous.
No, that's perfect. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. I think it's, I just love the practicality of this. We started to talk about assessments and how a good way to do assessments and not so good way to do assessments. And now you're talking about very specific ways in which you can look at a child and go into a class and what you need to observe to make an informed decision. I think I want to tie this with something you said earlier, which is you should give the child time, 6 months, a year. Those are the kind of time frames in which AAC success happens. But I'm sure you've seen this, Carol, and I'm sure every therapist has seen this. There are times when AAC is just misdiagnosed. I mean, you give a child a device or an app that doesn't really work for them anymore. Maybe they've outgrown it, maybe it wasn't the right app for them in the first place, and you need to switch. And that's not something that one finds a whole literature about. When somebody is switching from one AAC app or device to another, what do you think are the best ways maybe of going about it? When do you do it and how do you do it?
Sure. Well, I have to say, honestly, Ajit, that's not a situation I encounter all that often. Honestly, when an a speech generating device or an AAC app isn't working, I rarely look to changing the app or the device. In my experience, the best prognostic factor for positive outcomes is more in the therapy or in the family training or in the educational supports than it is in the app itself. However, I absolutely acknowledge the reality of what you are saying. There are times where, let's say, I'm thinking of a young man that I have worked with who had essentially outgrown one kind of free low-cost app, and he was ready for a more full-featured app because we had done a good job in teaching him the power of communication and the fact that he could use this crazy thing to get his own agenda addressed. And now he was ready for us to chart a course forward, and that for him did mean an app that had more robustness built in. So I think it's different strategies for different learners. But for him, what we did was have two apps simultaneously, right? We continued to use the old app and we gradually introduced the new one. Well, that was in a way my survival strategy because it's going to take me a while. He needed really, I thought, a visual scene display app, right? So it's going to take me a while to get the photos of the visual scenes and figure out which visual scene app and, start to program it and, work with his family around all that. So it's going to take me selfishly sometimes, so it bought me a little time to do that. But also, I think it's really important that we don't pull the rug out from under them. And I know we're running late on time. Is it okay if I do one quick story? So as an undergraduate student at the University of Pittsburgh, one of the jobs that I had was as a group home worker. And I'm old, and so this really dates me. But at that time, I grew up and was going to college in Pennsylvania. And this was at a time where deinstitutionalization was happening. And people were leaving large residential institutions and coming into group homes, and in my case, apartments. And so I had the privilege of being a group home person for three amazing gentlemen in their 40s and 50s with significant cognitive impairment. And they had spent most of their lives, almost in their entire lives, in these residential facilities. And they were folks, with intellectual disability. And they spoke for the most part, but not well. Some of them didn't speak. But they all signed, right? And that worked beautifully in the residential institution with 1,000 residents, because I worked in those institutions too. And all of the direct care staff signed, the teachers signed, the SLP signed, the cafeteria people signed, the janitor signed, we all signed, right? But now they're living in the community. So when I take them to open their bank account, or we go to McDonald's, or we go to the grocery store, my happy, wonderful gentlemen are eagerly wanting to make connections and friends, and they're signing all over the place to people, and people are, backing off like, what the heck is this, right? So we put them in an environment where signing, which has worked for them for literally decades, no longer is a feasible communication approach, right? And so we pulled the rug out from under them. And what that taught me as a 19-year-old is that's probably not a great idea unless, you want to have tantrums in the middle of the subway, right? Or in a crowded McDonald's. You can't do that to people, right? So the way I kind of operationalize that in this context is let them continue to have access to what's already working for them before, in a gradual way, and transition them to the new thing. And you know what? Let them show us when they're ready to no longer use the old one. What's the big deal if I have both of them on their iPad, right? What's the big deal? I have nothing to lose, right? It's much better for them to make the decision and gradually use this one more than that one. And then we can just continue using that. So that's just an idea there.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't have gone there. That's actually fascinating. Well, I know we are sort of running low on time, so I guess I wanted to give you the opportunity to say anything that you feel like we haven't asked. What else would you like to share with the AAC community?
Wow, that's such a privilege. Thank you.
Super broad question.
I just that I think we're at the beginning of really noticing a true shift in the AAC landscape in terms of how intervention and support for learning is happening. So we've known for a long time that just having the equipment in place is not likely to lead to the outcomes we're all like wishing for, desiring, and envisioning, at least in most cases. And as Dave Buchanan was very fond of saying in the early days, having an AAC device isn't going to make somebody a communicator any more than having a piano makes you a musician, right? It just doesn't go that way, right? It's about the support for learning language and learning to interact with others, right? That's really where the magic is. And for the past few decades, the pace of change in this aspect of AAC, right, has been driven primarily by two forces, right? One's been universities, right, because we train the next generation of service providers. And the other is professional organizations, right, because they're stuck with all of us that are already out there, right? And they're responsible in some way for our professional development and the standards that we have to address, right? And they've really tried. I know because I've been heavily invested in both, right? I ran the AAC division for ASHA for many years. I was on the steering committee for years. Beyond that, they've really tried. But the reality is they have too many competing priorities to make the kind of investment that the AAC field needs, right? And what we're seeing now is that other stakeholders are stepping up. And this is just fascinating to me. So parents like Erin Sheldon from Canada with her AAC and literacy camps and seminars, and Dana Meter with her amazing blog on common sense, and all of those who so actively support each other on Facebook groups, right? They're taking charge, and they're having an impact in ways that professional organizations and universities have not. And AAC vendors, too, are making incredible contributions in this area, right? They fully understand that no matter how amazing their product is, right, it isn't very likely to be successful unless the intervention and the supports are there. And if it isn't successful for the individual, forget about the long-term success of the company, right? That's at risk. I mean, it would be short-sighted, right? Because they know if you have an app and it doesn't work for somebody, you're only giving yourself a black eye to do that more and more often, right? So they've really stepped up, with toolkits and intervention videos and therapy materials and webinars and lesson plans and blog posts, user groups and websites like exactly what you're doing with Discover AAC. So, you guys have really stepped up to fill the void, and it's so exciting for me to play this little role in it. I just really thank you for having me today. It's just a fun time to be doing this.
Thank you so much, Carol. At this point of time, I'm just sitting here and wishing I was a student of yours and know how to learn, doing semesters and semesters of learning all of this stuff from you. It's one thing to talk authoritatively about a which you do so well. It's another thing to talk with so much passion about it. And it's incredible. I can tell you, I'm so stoked up about AAC right now. And I think it's a fantastic profession that all of us are in. We know how impactful it is, and it's just fantastic to have somebody as inspiring as you to be on Discover AAC with us, holding the flag aloft and doing such incredible work. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, everyone.